When single dad Ben Carter offered a tearful stranger half of his peanut butter sandwich, he didn't know she was Lena Wilderthy, world's most private billionaire, missing from the spotlight for years. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind carried the faint scent of cut grass as Ben Carter settled onto the splintered bench near the playground, his lunch bag crinkling in his lap. It was just another Tuesday. The sky hung low with soft gray clouds, but the air was warm enough that kids still ran shouting across the jungle gym. Hazel was among them, her strawberry blonde hair escaping her braid as she climbed to the top of the slide, arms thrown up in triumph. Ben unwrapped his sandwich, peanut butter and banana, the only thing he'd had time to throw together, and took a slow bite. His shoulders ached from the morning's engine rebuild, but this half-hour break was his. A quiet routine. A small breath in the chaos of paycheck-to-paycheck life. That's when he noticed her. She sat on a bench a little ways off, back rigid, face turned toward the trees. From a distance, she looked composed, elegant even. Brown hair pulled into a low bun, a cream sweater wrapped tight around her like a shield. But as he squinted, he saw her shoulders tremble. One hand clutched the edge of her seat, the other held a tissue to her cheek. Crying. Not the dramatic kind, quiet, careful crying. The kind you try to hide, even from yourself. Ben hesitated. Maybe she didn't want anyone to notice. Maybe she was just passing through, having a moment. But something about the way she sat so still, in the middle of a space filled with laughter, made him shift. He stood, walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Hey," he said gently, holding out the other half of his sandwich. "It's nothing fancy, but peanut butter's better than tears." She turned, startled. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotchy, but she managed a small, incredulous laugh. A heartbeat later, she reached out and took it. "Thanks," she said softly. He gave a half smile. "You looked like you needed a win." And for a few minutes, they sat in silence, side by side, chewing on a sandwich, and a moment that neither of them could explain, but neither wanted to end. She held the sandwich like it might fall apart in her hands. Like no one had handed her anything without asking for something in return in a very long time. Ben watched her out of the corner of his eye, not wanting to make it awkward. The park buzzed around them, kids shouting from the monkey bars, a toddler crying over a stolen toy, the rustle of wind through freshly budding trees. But here, on this faded green bench tucked behind the swings, the world felt strangely still. He didn't ask what was wrong, didn't prod. That wasn't his way. He'd learned long ago that sometimes silence spoke louder than sympathy. She took a bite, small, hesitant, like she was testing it. "It's not poisoned," he offered, a quiet grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. That got a laugh short, surprised but real. "I figured," she said, wiping at the corner of her mouth with the sleeve of her sweater, "just to haven't had peanut butter in a long time." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a shame. Peanut butter's the glue holding single parenthood together." Her gaze flicked to the playground. "Your daughter?" "Hazel." He nodded. 6 going on 16. She's the reason I remember how to smile." The woman's eyes lingered on Hazel for a moment, swinging wildly, laughing like the world was hers. "She's lucky." "I'm the lucky one," Ben replied, voice steady. "She keeps me human." They sat like that for a while, the silence no longer uncomfortable. It was the kind that fills the space between strangers before they stop feeling like strangers. She didn't talk much, but her posture shifted, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. "Lena," she said quietly, after a long moment. Ben turned toward her. "Sorry?" "My name, it's Lena," he nodded. "Nice to meet you, Lena. I'm Ben." She looked at him then, really looked. Like she was seeing him for the first time, and not just the man who offered her half a sandwich. And for the first time that day, her eyes weren't filled with tears but something softer. Something closer to hope. Ben wasn't expecting her to stay. Most people didn't. They came to the park, took a walk, let the wind carry whatever burden they were wrestling with, and disappeared back into their world. but Lanashi stayed. Not close, not far, just near enough. Hazel noticed first. The moment she tumbled off the slide in a flurry of laughter and static cling hair, she spotted the woman sitting beside her dad. Hazel slowed, cautious in the way only kids are when something doesn't quite fit. "Hi," she said simply, brushing wood chips off her leggings as she approached. Lena looked up, startled. For a beat, her expression flickered worry, maybe even fear, but then she forced a small smile and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hi there," she replied, voice soft but kind. "I'm Hazel," the girl declared proudly, leaning into Ben's side with the confidence of someone who knew she was safe here. Ben chuckled, giving her an affectionate nudge. "Hazel, this is Lena." Lena turned her attention back to Hazel, her smile still there but not quite settled. "Nice to meet you, Hazel." "Are you my dad's friend?" Hazel asked bluntly, the way only children can. Lena blinked. I don't know. Maybe?" She glanced at Ben, unsure. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. "We just met." Hazel nodded, accepting this without hesitation. "That's okay. My dad makes friends everywhere." Lena let out a soft laugh, one that sounded like it surprised even her. Her hands were still clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale against the sleeves of her sweater. She looked like someone who had forgotten how to relax. Ben noticed the tremor in her fingers when she reached for the paper napkin he'd offered earlier. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "Everything okay?" he asked, not pressing, just offering. She nodded too quickly. "Yes, thank you, just long day." Ben didn't ask for more. He just sat back and let Hazel carry the conversation, which she did, effortlessly talking about school, her favorite cartoons, and how peanut butter sandwiches were way better with banana slices. Lena listened like someone who hadn't heard anything real in a long time. She still hadn't offered a last name, but she'd offered her first. And sometimes, that was enough to begin. Hazel wasn't shy. Not in the way adults sometimes tiptoe around pain or strangers or silence. She had the kind of open-hearted boldness that could disarm even the most guarded person and, in that moment, her attention turned squarely to Lena. "Want to play tag?" she asked, eyes wide with invitation. Ben looked up from his water bottle, about to step in with a polite, "Maybe not today," but before he could speak, Lena glanced from him to Hazel. Her lips parted in surprise. "I don't think I'm dressed for," she began, gesturing down at her cream sweater and suede boots. Hazel didn't flinch. "You don't have to run fast. I'm always first anyway." Ben gave Lena a small shrug. Hazel logic, kind of hard to argue with. Lena hesitated. Then, to both their surprise, including her own, she smiled. A real one this time. Not practiced, not polite, just real. "Okay," she said quietly, "but only if you promise to go easy on me." Hazel lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Deal." And just like that, Hazel took off across the grass, laughter trailing behind her like a kite in the wind. Lena stood slowly, looking uncertain, then kicked off her heeled boots with a soft thud and followed, her laughter catching in her throat like she wasn't quite sure how it got there. Ben watched as his daughter zigzagged through the open field, Lena jogging behind her, arms awkward at first, but loosening with every step. A woman who had sat crying just 15 minutes earlier was now laughing in the sunlight, chasing a 6-year-old through a park like she'd done it 100 times. Other parents glanced their way, some curious, some indifferent. But Ben just sat back on the bench, elbows on his knees, letting the warm breeze drift over him. He didn't know who Lena was, not really. But seeing her there barefoot, hair coming undone, cheeks flushed from running, he knew she wasn't just another passerby. Eventually, Hazel dropped to the grass, breathless and giggling. Lena plopped down beside her, both of them laughing like old friends. And for that moment, they were. The next morning, the sky was clear and pale, sunlight spilling over the rooftops with the kind of soft golden promise that hinted spring might finally stick around. Ben packed Hazel's lunch while she brushed her teeth, her tiny voice echoing from the bathroom as she sang a half-remembered theme song. It was a normal morning. Ordinary. Easy. But as they pulled into the park lot on their way to school, Hazel's favorite stop for 5 minutes of swing time, Ben's eyes drifted to the bench where Lena had been. Empty. No boots tucked underneath. No cream sweater. No sign of laughter or lingering warmth. Just wind brushing through the trees and the faint creak of the swing set. He scanned the parking lot. No sleek black car. No footprints in the damp grass. She was just gone. Hazel hopped out of the car, with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Is Miss Lena here?" she asked, scanning the field like it was a game of hide-and-seek. Ben shook his head. "Doesn't look like it, Bug." Hazel frowned, standing on tiptoes to peer down the sidewalk. "Maybe she's just late." "Maybe," Ben said, but even as he said it, he knew she wouldn't be coming back. People like Lena didn't linger. She had the look of someone just passing through, like her stay in their little town had been an accident, a wrong turn, a pause she hadn't meant to take. Hazel played on the swings for a few minutes anyway, casting hopeful glances every time a car passed by. Ben sat on the same bench they'd all shared the day before, one arm draped over the back, the other holding his travel mug. He sipped his coffee slowly, letting the silence settle in. Whatever yesterday had been an odd detour, a moment of connection, a flicker of something unfinished, it was over now. And yet, as he buckled Hazel back into the car and pulled onto the road, he caught himself glancing in the rear-view mirror, half expecting a familiar figure to come walking up from the trees. But the road behind him stayed empty. The sound came just after midnight, a soft crunch of tires against gravel, steady and deliberate. Ben stirred from the worn recliner in his living room, the old baseball game still flickering faintly on the muted TV. Hazel had fallen asleep hours ago, curled up in her blanket fort on the couch, her favorite stuffed fox nestled under one arm. At first, he thought maybe it was the neighbor's kid getting home late again, but when he peeked through the blinds, the vehicle parked across the street wasn't familiar. A glossy black SUV sat under the street lamp, windows tinted so dark they swallowed the reflection of the pale porch light. It wasn't running. No headlights, no movement. Just sitting there, too polished, too clean, too quiet for their street. Ben watched for a minute, waiting to see if someone would get out. No one did. He leaned back from the window, rubbing the tired from his eyes. It wasn't unusual for lost travelers to pull over for a nap, especially near the edge of town where GPS signals got spotty. And this wasn't exactly a high-crime neighborhood. Still, something about the SUV's stillness put a strange weight in his chest. After a few more minutes, he shrugged it off. Maybe someone from the city got turned around. Maybe it was nothing. By morning, the SUV was gone. Not a tire mark on the gravel. No note, no trace. Ben didn't mention it to Hazel. She'd asked too many questions. She'd wonder if it was Lena. And the truth was, she'd wondered that too, but it didn't make sense. People like Lena didn't drive themselves around in the middle of the night to the side street of a mechanic with a busted porch swing and a crooked mailbox. Still, that SUV had looked expensive. Exactly the kind of vehicle someone like her might sit in when they didn't know how to say hello. Ben told himself to forget it. Told himself it wasn't worth thinking about. But that night, before turning in, he looked out the window again, just in case. 3 days passed, 3 long, ordinary days filled with school drop-offs, oil changes, and the rhythmic hum of socket wrenches. Ben buried himself in work at the garage, grateful for the distraction, even if it didn't bring in much money. Hazel had stopped asking about Lena by the second morning, but Ben hadn't stopped thinking about her. Not entirely. Not when he walked past that same bench on the way to the coffee shop. Not when he swore he caught a whiff of her perfume in the aisle of the grocery store. So when he heard the low purr of an engine pulling into the shop lot late Thursday afternoon, he barely looked up until he caught sight of the car. It was sleek, silver gray with blacked-out trim. The same SUV. Same polished finish. Same silence behind the glass. And when the door opened, she stepped out. Lena. Her hair was pulled into a high ponytail this time, sunglasses perched on her head instead of hiding her face. She looked tired, paler than before. But there was something in her expression that felt steadier too, like maybe she'd come back on purpose. Ben wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward her. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said, keeping his voice even. "I wasn't sure I'd come back," she admitted. "But my car made the decision for me." She pointed to the rear of the vehicle where a quiet ticking came from beneath the hood. Ben listened for half a second, already forming a theory. "Sounds like the alternator's giving you attitude," he said. "Could be loose wiring, might be worse." Lena nodded, almost sheepishly. "I was hoping you'd take a look." Ben waved her toward the waiting bench outside the shop. "I've got time now." She hesitated. "What do I owe you?" He paused, just long enough to make it clear the answer wasn't changing. "Nothing." "But," he cut her off gently, "if I charged every person who needed help, I'd hate what I do." Lena stared at him for a moment, eyes unreadable. Then, quietly, she sat down. Ben turned back to the engine, heart beating faster than it should have. Not because the job was hard, because she came back. The engine had only taken 20 minutes to fix a frayed belt and a loose connector. Nothing fancy. Lena had offered again to pay, more insistent this time, but Ben shut it down with a quiet shake of his head. She didn't argue after that. Just stood there in the soft light of early evening, her arms crossed like she was holding something in. Then she said, almost too casually, "Do you know a place with decent coffee?" Ben didn't hesitate. "Marla's Diner. It's old, but the coffee's hot and the pie's honest." A few minutes later, they sat across from each other in a cracked vinyl booth that smelled faintly of bacon grease and sugar. The waitress brought 2 mugs, a silver carafe and a knowing smirk, but didn't linger. Ben stirred his coffee slowly, trying to figure out what this was, just gratitude or something else entirely. Hazel was at a friend's house for a sleepover. The garage was closed. And Lena, for the first time, looked like she wasn't in a hurry to leave. Ben leaned back, one arm over the back of the booth. "So," he said, "what brings a woman like you to a town like this?" Lena smiled faintly. "You're assuming I had a plan." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. "I was driving." Kept going until things got quiet. She stirred her coffee, though she hadn't added anything to it. Ben nodded slowly. "Quiet can be a good thing." "Or a dangerous one," she replied, almost under her breath. They fell into a silence that wasn't heavy, just real. Ben took a sip, then set his cup down. "Hazel's mom died when she was 4. Car accident. Wrong place, wrong time." Lena looked up. Her expression softened. "I wasn't ready," Ben continued. "But when are you, right?" Suddenly, it was just me and this tiny human who needed me to keep moving. So I did. I still am. Lena didn't speak right away. She just watched him, eyes calm, hands around her mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "You're a good dad," she said finally. Ben smiled, a little sad. "I'm trying." Lena offered no details about herself, no mention of family, no job, no past. But in the stillness between sips of coffee, she listened like no one had in a long time. And for Ben, that was enough for now. It was the next day, right after Ben picked Hazel up from school, that the invitation came. Lena stood by her car in front of the garage, dressed in dark jeans and a soft navy coat, her hands buried in the pockets like she was trying to keep herself from changing her mind. Hazel spotted her first and bolted from the truck, arms swinging wildly. "Miss Lena!" she called out, bright as ever. Lena Smileda, genuine, easy thing that Ben hadn't seen from her before, and crouched to meet Hazel in a quick hug. Ben stepped out slower, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Everything okay with the car?" "Runs like new," Lena said. Then, after a breath, "I was actually hoping to ask something else." Ben tilted his head. "All right. I'd like to take you both to dinner," she said, "as a thank you. And because I'd like to." Hazel gasped audibly. Can we, Dad? Please? Ben looked between them. Lena's voice had been calm, but there was a hint of nerves tucked into the corners of her mouth, like she wasn't used to asking for things. Like the word dinner carried more weight than it should have. We don't really do fancy, Ben said carefully. It's just dinner, she replied, then added, I made a reservation already. Figured I'd risk being turned down. He studied her for a moment, but Hazel was already bouncing in place, her excitement sealing the deal. What kind of place? Ben asked. Lena hesitated, then gave a small shrug. Italian, downtown, valet parking, linen napkins, probably too much. Ben let out a soft laugh. Definitely too much. But Hazel was beaming, and Lena looked hopeful in a quiet, breakable kind of way. All right, he said finally. But fair warning, we don't know which fork goes with which plate. Lena smiled, almost shy. I don't think I ever did either. She handed him a small card with the address and time, then stepped back toward her car. I'll see you tonight? Ben nodded. As she pulled away, Hazel grabbed his hand and whispered, She's like a fairy godmother. But real. Ben wasn't sure what Lena was, but he was starting to want to find out. Ben had never seen so many wine glasses on one table. The hostess had led them through velvet-draped doors and into a dimly lit dining room filled with hushed conversations and the soft clinking of silverware. White tablecloths stretched like clouds across every table, and candles flickered inside glass globes. It was the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices, and the waiters spoke in low, reverent tones like they were delivering secrets. Ben shifted in his seat, tugging at the collar of his only button-up shirt wrinkled from the back seat of his truck, and stared down at his calloused hands resting on the tablecloth. His jeans were clean but still bore the stubborn shadow of grease stains, and his boots, no matter how hard he'd scrubbed them, looked out of place on the polished tile floor. Hazel, on the other hand, was radiant. She sat perched on the edge of her chair in a sparkly purple dress that swished every time she moved. Lena had sent it over earlier that afternoon, folded neatly in a tissue-lined box, along with a matching pair of shoes and a note that read, "Just in case she wants to feel like magic." She'd squealed, spun in circles, and begged Ben to let her wear it. He hadn't stood a chance. Now Hazel chatted happily with Lena, asking about every item on the menu and mispronouncing the pasta names without shame. She didn't care that they didn't fit in here. She was too busy enjoying the moment. Lena looked stunning again. A soft emerald dress, hair swept to one side, minimal makeup. But there was something else tonight, too. A quiet tension under the surface, like she was trying not to scare the moment away. Ben cleared his throat as the waiter poured sparkling water into crystal glasses. "You know," he muttered to Lena, "I've eaten more peanut butter sandwiches in the last month than I've seen cloth napkins in my life." She smiled, eyes twinkling. Then tonight, we balanced the scale a little. He wanted to tell her he didn't belong here, that his life didn't come with appetizers or sommeliers. But then Hazel laughed loud, unfiltered, unbothered, and, in that moment, it didn't matter. They were together, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Dinner had gone smoother than Ben expected. Hazel devoured a bowl of spaghetti the size of her head. Lena laughed more than she had the entire week, and Ben found himself relaxing, even smiling, despite the polished silverware and waiters, who looked like they hadn't smiled since birth. For a while he almost forgot where they were. Almost forgot they didn't belong, but the illusion cracked just a little when the check arrived, not because of the total, which Lena had already insisted was hers, but because of the small white valet ticket she slid onto the table beside it. Ben caught it out of the corner of his eye. A simple card with the restaurant's gold logo embossed at the top, a number scribbled in black pen across the middle, and just beneath it, printed in neat type, Wilder. L. His fingers froze around his water glass. Wilder. The name echoed in his head like a bell rung too close to his ear. It wasn't common, not around here. And it wasn't just that it sounded familiar, it was familiar. Lena Wilder. He didn't say anything. Not right away. He glanced up at her, laughing softly as Hazel explained why ravioli was clearly superior to all other pasta shapes. Lena nodded along, completely at ease, her napkin folded neatly in her lap, her voice low and warm. It was her. He was sure of it now. Lena Wilderthy, missing heiress. The woman whose face had once graced every business magazine and talk show headline. The tech empire, the family scandal, the sudden disappearance. She'd vanished from the public eye years ago, walked away from billions, and no one had heard a word since, until now. Ben sat back, letting the realization sink in. She had come to his town, sat on his bench, fixed her car in his shop, played tag with his daughter, all without ever saying a word about who she was. And, somehow, he wasn't angry, just curious. And more than a little stunned. He looked at her again, and this time, Lena's smile faltered ever so slightly, like maybe she knew the moment was slipping. Like maybe she knew he knew. But Ben didn't say anything. Not yet. The next time Lena came by, it was with a thermos of coffee and a quiet smile. She leaned against the side of the garage while Ben tightened a radiator hose beneath the hood of a rusted-out pickup, and for a while, neither of them said much. Ben didn't bring up the valet stub. Didn't mention the name. No questions about headlines or fortune or why a woman with that kind of last name had chosen to hide out in a town like this. Instead, he handed her a wrench without looking up and said, "Mind holding this in place for a second?" Lena blinked, caught off guard, but took the tool and crouched beside him, steadying the clamp like she'd done it before. They worked side by side in companionable silence, her dress coat folded over the workbench, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal pale wrists. She didn't flinch when grease smudged her hand. Didn't hesitate when Ben asked her to hand him a socket driver from the open toolbox. When the job was done, she dusted off her jeans and offered him the thermos. "Still hot," she said. "Thought you might need it." Ben took it with a nod and a soft thanks. He didn't mention the company she'd once helmed. Didn't ask why she'd disappeared from the world. Didn't ask if she missed it, and Lena noticed. She watched him as he sipped the coffee, leaning against the truck like it was the most normal thing in the world. She tilted her head, studying his face with quiet curiosity, like she was trying to figure him out. "You're not going to ask," she said finally. Ben shrugged. "Didn't think I needed to." Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Then, just above a whisper, "Most people do." "I'm not most people." She looked down, smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "No, you're not." There was a long pause, the kind that didn't feel empty, just full of things neither of them needed to say out loud. And for the first time in a very long while, Lena felt like she could breathe. Like maybe, just maybe. Being seen didn't have to mean being exposed. The house was quiet after Hazel went to bed, her soft breathing drifting down the hall like a lullaby wrapped in flannel sheets. Ben sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him, the screen casting a pale glow across the wood grain. He stared at the search bar for a long moment before typing the name he'd been holding in the back of his mind all week. Lena Wilder. It only took seconds. Articles, photos, headlines that once dominated the news cycle lined the screen in sharp, bold fonts. Wilder heiress. Vanishes after parents' tragic death. Tech empire in limbo. Where in the world is Lena Wilder? Ben scrolled through pages of images: Lena at tech conferences, Lena in elegant gowns at charity galas, Lena in tailored suits beside her father at product launches. Her smile was always camera-ready, her posture perfect, but her eyes. He recognized the weight in them now, the exhaustion masked as poise. Her parents had died in a small plane crash 6 years ago. The articles said it was a private flight routine, familiar until it wasn't. Lena had been 27 at the time, the only heir to the Wilder legacy, which included a tech company valued in the billions and a boardroom full of suits waiting for her to break. She did, apparently. Just not in the way they'd expected. One day, she gave a press statement. The next day, she disappeared. No sightings, No interviews, no scandals or tell-all memoirs. She'd simply walked away. Ben sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The woman who had been sitting across from him just that morning, her sleeves rolled up, grease on her hands, laughing at one of Hazel's knock-knock jokes, was the same woman the world had been hunting for years. And yet, she'd never once mentioned it, never dropped the name, never flaunted the weight of her legacy like it meant anything in a town with more tractors than Teslas. Ben closed the laptop gently. He wasn't angry, just stunned. And more curious than ever about the woman who'd walked away from the world and chosen, of all places, this one. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind where the sky turned soft and pink around the edges and the whole town seemed to exhale. Hazel had fallen asleep in the back seat after an impromptu trip to the bookstore, and Ben had offered to drive Lena home. She didn't object. They pulled up to the cottage she'd been renting on the edge of town, known of those modest, tucked-away places with ivy on the fence and wind chimes that never stopped singing. Ben parked but didn't kill the engine. He figured she'd say thanks and head inside. Instead, she sat there, hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. "I know you looked me up," she said quietly. Ben glanced at her, caught off guard but didn't deny it. "I did." She nodded, as if she'd been waiting for that moment. He didn't press. Just let the silence settle, warm and weighty. Then softly, "It started before the plane crash. My father had built Wilder Tech from nothing out of our garage, actually. He was brilliant, but reckless. My mother, she was the glue. When they died, everyone looked to me to hold it all together." Her voice didn't crack, but it thinned, like a thread pulled too tight. "I was grieving, drowning, but the board didn't care. Investors didn't care. They wanted me to smile at the cameras and sign off on decisions I didn't believe in. And when I pushed back, they pushed harder." She paused, eyes distant now, lost somewhere in the shimmer of memory. "I had friends who stopped taking my calls. A fiancé who told me he couldn't ride out the uncertainty. I was surrounded by people, but I'd never felt more alone." Ben said nothing, just watched her. Listened. "I didn't run," she added, voice firm now. "I walked, quietly, on my own terms. I left them the company, the spotlight, the headlines. I didn't want to win, I just wanted out." She finally looked at him then. No makeup, no armor, just Lena. "I never expected to stay here," she whispered. "But then I met your daughter, then I met you." Ben reached for the gear shift, but paused, his hand resting there. "You don't owe me explanations." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm giving you one." The first sign something was wrong came in the form of a handshake. Ben wiped his hands on a rag as his boss, Cal, strolled into the garage mid-morning wearing a collared shirt instead of his usual oil-stained flannel. That alone was enough to make Ben pause. Cal never dressed up unless there was bad news or a funeral. Sometimes both. "Got a minute?" Cal asked, nodding toward the office. Ben followed him in, the air inside thick with dust and the faint scent of old coffee. The blinds were half drawn, the sun streaking through like it was trying to sneak a look at the conversation. "I'm retiring," Cal said, just like that. "Sold the shop," Ben blinked. "To who?" "Some outfit out of the city, expansion thing. Big brand, fancy name, they're taking over next month." Ben tried to process it. He'd worked at Harrison's garage for almost 10 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was steady. It was home. "Are they keeping the crew?" Cal shifted in his chair. "Some of you don't know the full list yet. They're looking at numbers, not faces." Ben's stomach dropped. Back in the garage, he stared at the rows of toolboxes, the grease-stained floor, the cracked blue wall with Hazel's old drawing still thumbtacked near his workbench, a lopsided car with hearts around it. He'd built a life here, not a rich one, but an honest one. Losing it felt like the ground shifting beneath him. By the time he picked Hazel up from school, his thoughts were racing. The bills on the fridge weren't going to pause. The rent wouldn't stop. He'd already been stretching every paycheck to make it work. Hazel's school shoes, the power bill, a chipped filling he still hadn't fixed. There wasn't a backup plan, there wasn't time. Hazel climbed into the truck, chattering about art class and library books. Ben nodded along, smiling where he should, but his mind was far away. That night, after she fell asleep, he sat at the kitchen table under the hum of the flickering light bulb and did the math. It didn't look good. It was late, and the garage lights were off. But Lena knocked anyway. Ben had been sitting at the kitchen table again, staring down at a notepad covered in scribbles numbers that didn't line up, overdue notices, a flyer for a second-hand tool auction he couldn't afford to attend. Hazel was asleep, the TV murmuring low in the background, but the knock pulled him from the spiral in his mind. When he opened the door, Lena stood on the porch holding a small paper bag and a look that hovered between hesitation and resolve. "You left your thermos at the park," she said. Ben took the bag and gave a tired smile. "Thanks." She didn't leave. Instead, her eyes darted past him into the quiet of the house, where the edges of his reality showed into walls, frayed curtains, an old heater that ticked louder than it warmed. "I heard about the garage," she said softly. "I'm sorry." Ben sighed and leaned against the doorframe. "Yeah, Cal's moving on. New owners want fresh faces." There was a pause. Then she spoke, carefully measured. "I could help." He blinked. "Help?" "I could cover a few months," she said. "Just until things settle. Give you time to figure out your next step." He straightened, something inside him tightening. "Lena." "It's not charity," she said quickly, stepping forward. "It's gratitude. You've been good to me, kind. Real. Let me return that." Ben met her eyes. "That's the thing. You don't owe me anything." She opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. "I appreciate the offer," he said, quieter now. "But I've worked too hard to stand on my own feet just to lean on someone else's." Lena looked down, her shoulders stiffening just slightly. "So, what, your pride won't let you accept a little help?" "It's not pride," Ben replied. "It's principle. I'm not ashamed of struggling. I just want to get through it on my terms." The porch light buzzed above them, casting a warm glow between two people standing inches apart, separated by things neither could name. After a moment, Lena gave a slow nod. "Okay, I understand." Ben offered her a tired smile. "But the thermos? I'll take that." And somehow she smiled too, because even rejection, when it came from him, still felt honest. By Saturday morning, the whispers had found their way into the corners of the town, like wind sneaking through a cracked window, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. It started at Margie's Deli, where old men gathered over black coffee and dry toast, and where anything unusual was chewed over longer than the food. "You seen that woman?" one of them asked, raising an eyebrow over the rim of his mug. "The one always with Ben Carter? Drives that shiny SUV. Too pretty for a town like this," another muttered, shaking his head. "Definitely not from around here." "She's not just pretty," Margie chimed in from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "She's expensive. You see that coat she wears? Pure cashmere. I saw one just like it in Chicago, cost more than my stove." Across town, at Hazel's school pickup line, two mothers leaned against a minivan with crossed arms and narrowed eyes. "He's a single dad, right? Since the accident?" "Mm-hmm. And now she's just suddenly around, picking up his daughter from art class like she's family? I bet she's one of those influencers, or worse, some big city investor looking to buy up property." By the time Ben walked into the hardware store for a box of nails and a quart of paint, even old Frank behind the counter tilted his head a little too knowingly. "Saw you with that lady again," he said, drawing out the word like it meant something else entirely. Ben kept his expression flat. "She's a friend," Frank grunted, unconvinced. "Fancy kind of friend." Ben didn't respond, just took his receipt and left. It wasn't that the town was unkind. It just had long memory and short patience for mystery. And Lena beautiful, poised, private Lena was mystery personified. The way she walked, the way she spoke, The subtle edge of something refined in her every movement. It didn't go unnoticed. Ben felt it when he stopped for gas, and the clerk smiled just a little too wide. He felt it when two women paused their conversation as he walked by the bakery. He hadn't said a word, but the town had already written the first chapter of their story. Too bad it wasn't theirs to tell. It was a rainy Tuesday when the call came in. Ben had just finished patching a leaky radiator under a rust-bitten Ford when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. He wiped his hands on his jeans, sighed, and answered with a gruff, "This is Ben." "Mr. Carter? This is Mrs. Delaney, Hazel's art teacher. I was wondering if you had a moment to chat?" Ben's stomach sank. No parent ever loved a call that started like that. "Is she all right?" he asked, straightening up. "Oh, she's fine. She's wonderful, actually. Very expressive. I just had a little concern about one of her drawings." By the time he arrived at the school, the rain had softened to a drizzle, and the clouds hung low over the playground. Mrs. Delaney greeted him with a strained smile and led him into the brightly decorated classroom. On the back wall, beneath a banner that read "Our Favorite Places," a line of crayon-drawn scenes stretched across the bulletin board, tree houses, backyards, the town pool. And right in the middle of it all, Hazel's drawing. It was extravagant. A sweeping mansion with turrets and a winding driveway, complete with fountains and rows of sports cars drawn with red and gold crayons. Lush gardens lined the front. And standing in front of it, a woman in a long blue dress and big sunglasses, labeled in wobbly handwriting, "Miss Lena's Castle House." Ben stared. Mrs. Delaney cleared her throat. "Hazel said she's been spending time there, that Miss Lena picks her up sometimes and brings her for tea." Ben exhaled slowly. "It's not a castle," he muttered. "I didn't think so," the teacher replied gently. "But some of the other kids are asking questions about where Miss Lena lives, about why Hazel says she has gold spoons and elevators inside her house." Ben winced. "She's got an imagination." "She's got a good memory," Mrs. Delaney said kindly. "Whatever this is, Mr. Carter, just be mindful. Kids talk, and adults listen." Later that night, Ben tucked Hazel into bed and sat beside her for a while. "Hey, Bug," he said softly. "Tell me about that drawing." Hazel beamed. "Miss Lena's house is like a fairy tale, Daddy. But she says she likes ours better because it has pancakes and you." Ben swallowed hard. He didn't know what Lena was to them yet. But it was clear she already meant something to Hazel. And maybe to him, too. The first camera crew showed up on a Thursday morning. Ben had just opened the shop, keys still jingling in his hand, when a sleek black van pulled into the gravel lot. A woman in heels stepped out, followed by a man with a camera hoisted on his shoulder. The logo on the side read, "Entertainment Now." Bright, loud, out of place. "Ben Carter?" the woman called out, already walking toward him, microphone in hand, and smile too wide to mean anything good. He froze. "Who's asking?" "We're hoping to get your side of the story. About Lena Wilder, the reclusive tech heiress, vanished for years now, hiding out in small-town America with a local mechanic? You've certainly become the headline." Ben didn't answer. Just turned, walked into the shop, and slammed the door shut behind him, but it didn't stop there. By noon, 2 more vans had arrived, this time from news networks with bigger names and shinier microphones. They loitered outside, filming the garage sign, asking anyone who passed by if they knew him. One caught a shot of Hazel peeking out from the shop's side door before Ben pulled her inside and locked it. The internet apparently had found them. And the town noticed. By Friday, the regulars stopped coming. Miss Franklin didn't bring her old Buick in for its usual oil change. Gus, who Ben had fixed up free more than once, suddenly canceled his appointment. Indefinitely. Even Frank from the hardware store barely made eye contact when Ben walked in. It was like a switch had been flipped. People who used to wave from across the street now turned away. He heard whispers in the grocery store, aisles phrases like gold digger, opportunist, and Must be nice to land a billionaire. The worst part? They didn't say it with anger. They said it with disappointment, like they'd expected better from him. Lena called. Twice. He didn't pick up. What was he supposed to say? That the world had barged in and wrecked everything he'd carefully built? That her name had become poison on his door? That night, he sat on the front steps alone, elbows on his knees, watching as another camera crew circled the block like vultures. He hadn't asked for any of this. All he'd done was share a sandwich. And now everything was falling apart. The calls stopped first. For 3 days, Ben checked his phone every morning before opening the shop. Nothing. No texts. No voicemails. The number Lena had used rang once, then dropped straight to silence. He told himself not to worry. Maybe she was laying low, waiting for the storm to blow over. Maybe her lawyer had stepped in. Maybe she just needed space. But by the 4th day, the house she'd been renting was empty. Ben stood on the front porch, Hazel holding his hand, staring at the door that had once opened to soft music and the smell of chamomile tea. The blinds were drawn. The wind chimes still hung by the steps, but they didn't move. The mailbox had been cleared out. The welcome mat was gone. Lena was gone. There was no note, no explanation, just absence. Hazel looked up at him, confused. "Where's Miss Lena?" Ben knelt beside her, choosing his words with care. "I think she had to leave, Bug. Maybe for something important. Without saying goodbye?" He didn't have a good answer for that. Just brushed her hair back gently and whispered, "Sometimes grown-ups don't know how to say goodbye the right way." Hazel's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, slowly, and let him carry her back to the truck. Ben checked the mail. Nothing. Checked his phone. Still nothing. That night, the news cycles moved on. The vans stopped circling. The whispers faded. Lena Wilder, the missing billionaire, had become a footnote again until the next headline. The world outside moved on fast. But Ben didn't. He still looked at the empty chair at the diner some mornings, half expecting her to walk through the door. Still caught himself reaching for a second mug when he made coffee. Still heard Hazel whisper, "Miss Lena," in her sleep. It wasn't the kind of hurt that exploded. It was the kind that lingered, quiet, constant, like a door left open in a room you didn't want to close. And Ben, who had learned how to live through loss, found that even knowing someone for a short time could leave a long shadow. She had walked into his life like a whisper, and disappeared the same way. The garage closed for good on a gray Thursday morning. There were no speeches, no handshakes, no farewell party. Just a set of keys dropped off in an envelope, and a final walk through the echoing bays, where Ben had spent nearly a decade of his life. The tools were gone, sold off by the new owners. The smell of oil and sweat had already started to fade. What remained was silence and dust. Ben didn't linger. Bills still came, and Hazel still needed shoes that fit and lunches that didn't come from dollar menus. So he took the first job that said yes. Night janitor at the middle school 2 towns over. The hours were long, the pay barely covered the essentials, and the work was back-breaking, but it was steady. Each evening, after Hazel fell asleep on the couch with a book in her lap, Ben would quietly slip out, lunchbox in hand, and make the 40-minute drive down winding roads to sweep classrooms and empty trash bins under flickering fluorescent lights. No engines to fix. No customers to talk to. Just mops and floor wax and the quiet hum of vending machines in dark hallways. He didn't complain. Not once. Every dollar mattered. Every shift meant the lights stayed on, the rent got paid, and Hazel had enough for the book fair she'd circled on the school calendar. That was enough reason to keep going. On the weekends, he patched up neighbors' lawnmowers and old tractors for a little cash under the table. Some still gave him sidelong looks. Whispers stuck to their words like dustbutt. Others nodded, quiet and respectful, like they knew what it meant to just keep your head down and do the work. At night, after cleaning the last hallway and locking up, Ben would sit on the back steps of the school and look up at the stars. He didn't think about Lena. Not much. But every now and then, When the wind was still and the world felt heavy, he'd wonder if she ever looked back, and then he'd head home. Because no matter who stayed or left, Hazel still needed pancakes in the morning. And Ben still knew how to show up. It came on a Monday. Plain, white envelope. No return address. No stamp. Just his name, Ben Carter, typed neatly on the front in a font too clean to come from anyone local. He almost tossed it in the junk pile, assuming it was another piece of mail addressed to someone else. But something about the weight of it, the careful way the paper folded in his hand, made him pause. Inside, a single sheet of stationery and a folded cashier's check. He unfolded the letter first. Ben, I've tried a dozen times to write this. None of it sounds right. I don't know how to say thank you in a way that matches what you gave me, what you and Hazel gave me. You didn't ask for anything. Not my name, not my past, not what came with it. And when you found out, you still looked at me like I was a person, not a headline. I left because I had to, not because I wanted to. I panicked, and I took the easy way out. Again, this check won't fix what I broke, but it might help with what you've lost. Use it, or don't. Either way, know that someone out there is rooting for you. Hazel deserves every dream she has, and you deserve a little piece. The check was real. Stamped, signed, 5 digits, and a 0 at the end that made Ben sit down. He stared at it for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet kitchen. Outside, Hazel's bike lay in the yard where she'd left it, half-painted from their weekend project. Her laughter still echoed faintly in the house, even though she was upstairs, humming as she colored. He held the check between his fingers like it might melt if he gripped it too tight. No return address. No number to call. No way to answer. Just Lena, reaching out from somewhere far away, with silence and money and regret tucked into a thin envelope. Ben set it down on the table. Then he got up, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat there in the stillness, unsure if he felt grateful or heartbroken. Ben stared at the check on the kitchen table for a long time. Long enough that the sun shifted through the window and cast shadows across the faded wood. The envelope lay beside it, torn neatly open like it had nothing to hide except everything it held. He ran his thumb along the edge of the check. It wasn't the money that bothered him, it was the way it was sent. Quiet, safe, distant. Like Lena had found a way to say goodbye without actually having to say the word. Hazel bounced down the stairs in her pajamas, clutching her drawing pad, and plopped into a chair beside him. "What you doing, Daddy?" Ben folded the letter slowly. "Just reading something." Hazel glanced at the check. "Is that from Miss Lena?" He nodded. "Is she coming back?" Ben looked at his daughter's hopeful eyes and felt that familiar sting in his chest. "I don't think so, Bug." Hazel frowned, then went back to coloring. "She should." Ben didn't answer, but he agreed. That evening, after Hazel was in bed, he took out a fresh envelope from the old drawer in the hutch. No return address, so he sent it the only way he could, to the bank branch listed on the check. Inside, he included the check, untouched, and a single note written in his careful, mechanic's handwriting. "Lena, I didn't want your money. I wanted you." Then he sealed the envelope, pressed it shut, and walked it to the mailbox just past the edge of his yard. The flag went up with a quiet creak. And for a long time, he stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the night settle over the town. He didn't expect her to respond. Maybe she wouldn't even receive it. But it didn't matter. He needed to say it. The next day, when the mailbox was empty again, he felt a little lighter. Because sometimes, sending something away is the only way to let go, even if a part of you hopes it finds its way back. The bookstore smelled like old pages, and warm coffee, Ben's favorite kind. It was tucked between a record shop and a tailor's storefront in a city just far enough away from home to feel like another world. He and Hazel had made a day of it. Breakfast out, a stop at the Science Museum, and now, browsing the stacks while she hunted for a book about space dogs. Ben wandered through the nonfiction aisle, flipping half-heartedly, through a book on classic engine restorations, when he caught sight of her. At first, he thought he was imagining things. She stood near a shelf of poetry, her back to him, hair pulled into a loose braid, wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater. No sunglasses, no heels, no air of distance. Just a woman in a quiet bookstore, tracing the spines of books like she was looking for something she wasn't sure existed. His heart stuttered. "Lena?" She turned slowly. Her eyes widened, startled then, softened. "Ben." They stood there for a beat, both uncertain, both grounded in the same moment, yet unsure how to step into it. She began, then paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't think I'd see you again." He offered a small smile. "I didn't think I'd want to see you again, but here we are." She laughed softly, not defensively, this time, just gently, like it was safe to do so. "I come here when I need to breathe." "You found a good place for it." There was something different about her. The tension she used to wear like a second skin had loosened. Her voice was steady, not guarded. But there was still something behind her eyes, something unsure, as if she wasn't sure whether to stay or run. "Hazel's here," Ben said after a moment. "She's in the kids section, probably building a stack taller than she is." Lena's face lit up, then dimmed, just as quickly. "I shouldn't interrupt." "Then don't," Ben said, his voice low. "Just say hi." She hesitated, and then she nodded. "Okay." Because some moments didn't need planning. They just needed to happen. They ended up at a cafe next door to the bookstore, quiet, tucked beneath an awning, the kind of place where no one rushed you and the coffee came in mismatched mugs. Hazel had stayed behind in the children's nook, with a store clerk she'd immediately charmed. Lena had insisted on paying for everyone's drinks, despite Ben's half-hearted protest. Now they sat across from each other again, the space between them, small, but filled with all the things they hadn't said in weeks. Ben stirred his coffee, watching her over the rim. "You seem lighter." "I've been working on something," she said, her fingers curling around her mug. "Writing mostly." He tilted his head. "Writing what?" She hesitated, then pulled a small leather notebook from her bag and slid it across the table. On the front, embossed in gold foil, were the words, "Where I went when I left." Ben raised an eyebrow, fingers brushing the cover. "You're writing a memoir?" "Not exactly," Lena said. "I mean, it's a memoir, but it's not about the company or the scandals or the press." She looked out the window for a moment, then back at him. "It's about what it cost me to be everyone else's idea of who I should be. About how I disappeared, and why, and—" her voice dropped just a little. "About what I found when I finally stopped running." Ben's breath caught. "You wrote about Hazel?" he asked. "I wrote about both of you." She leaned forward, voice low and steady now. "The world saw me vanish. They didn't see who helped me feel human again. I needed to put it into words, not for headlines, for myself." Ben turned the notebook over in his hands. "You think anyone will believe it?" Lena smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Doesn't matter. I finally believe it." They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need to be filled, and for the first time since she'd left, Ben realized she hadn't just returned, she was starting to come home. The drive back from the city was quiet, Hazel asleep in the back seat, clutching her new stack of books like treasure. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the winding road. Ben's hands rested steady on the wheel, but his thoughts were still back at that cafe at Lena, at her notebook, at everything she'd said without saying too much. She was different now. Not less complicated, but less afraid. And that made him wary in a way he hadn't expected, because now she wasn't hiding behind silence or sunglasses. She was asking to be seen. For real. So when she called 2 nights later, he picked up. "Hey," her voice came through, warm but tentative. "Hey," he said back, leaning against the porch rail, the stars blinking quietly above the roofline. There was a pause on the line. Then, "Can I ask you something that might scare both of us?" Ben let out a soft breath. "You can try." "I've been thinking about starting over. Not disappearing. Not hiding, starting fresh." Her voice tightened slightly. "Somewhere that isn't tied to my past or your pain. Just a beginning." He didn't say anything, let her keep going. "I want to offer you and Hazel something. A place. A life. Not out of guilt. Not as some kind of repayment. Just because I care. About you. About her." She stopped, then added quieter, "Because I want us to be something. Together." Ben closed his eyes. "Let the words sink in. This isn't charity," she said. "It's an invitation." He looked toward the living room window. Hazel's drawings were taped up in crooked lines, rockets, flowers, one of a stick figure, Lena in a big dress next to a smiley-faced son. This house, small and worn as it was, held all the love he had left. And yet, the idea of building something new with someone stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. "You're not scared?" he asked. "I am," she said. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." He didn't give her an answer yet. But he didn't hang up either. The next morning, Ben stood in the kitchen flipping pancakes, Hazel humming along to a cartoon playing softly in the background. The smell of syrup and butter filled the air, warm and familiar. It was their routine, one of the few things untouched by the chaos of recent weeks. Lena's words still lingered in his mind. A beginning, not charity. Family. "I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Ben had replayed them over and over, running his fingers along the edges of what they could mean. He wasn't a man who jumped. Not into change, not into hope, not after what he'd lost. But Lena hadn't asked him to jump blindly. She'd asked for something quieter. Braver. A choice. Hazel sat at the table, legs swinging under her chair. "Daddy, can Miss Lena come over for pancakes next time?" Ben paused, spatula in hand. "Would you like that?" Hazel nodded enthusiastically. "She says she's not great at cooking, but she makes fancy tea. And she listens." He smiled, turning back to the stove. "Yeah," he said softly. "She does." Later that afternoon, when Hazel was off at a playdate and the house had fallen into a rare, peaceful quiet, Ben sat on the porch with his phone in his hand. He stared at Lena's name in his contacts. No voicemail, no script. He just dialed. She answered on the second ring, her voice a little breathless. "Ben?" "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, voice steady. "Okay," she said, hope and hesitation tangled in that one word. "I can't promise anything yet," he said. "But I'm not saying no." There was a beat of silence. Then, softly, "That's more than I expected." "It's not just about me," he added. "Hazel, she's been through enough. I won't let her fall for someone who's going to disappear again." "I won't," Lena said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not this time." Ben nodded to himself as if sealing something in place. "Then I guess we'll see where this goes." Not a yes, not a no. But sometimes, in the space between those two answers, a future can begin to take shape. Hazel's 7th birthday landed on a warm Saturday, the kind of day where the sun felt like a gift in itself. The backyard was strung with handmade paper streamers, the folding table covered in a plastic unicorn tablecloth that kept curling at the corners. A half-deflated bouncy castle leaned slightly to the left, but Hazel didn't mind. She was too busy racing her friends up and down the yard, her laugh trailing behind her like music. Ben manned the grill with a spatula in one hand and a wary eye on the melting cake in the shade. He'd gone all outer as all out as a tight budget and second-hand party supplies allowed. Hot dogs, juice boxes, paper crowns. Hazel was glowing. That was all that mattered. Then the gate creaked open. Ben turned, expecting one of the neighbor kids. Instead, he froze. Lena. She stood there holding a bundle of bright balloons in one hand and a small container of gourmet ice cream under the other arm, her smile equal parts nervous and hopeful. She wore jeans and sneakers, her hair pulled into a ponytail, and behind her, a puppy. Small, golden, all oversized paws and flopping ears. It wagged its tail furiously, leash in tow, nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Hazel spotted her next. "Miss Lena," she shrieked, running full speed across the yard. "You came!" Lena knelt, just in time to catch her in a hug. Wouldn't miss it for the world. The kids crowded around as the puppy gave out a small bark, then immediately tripped over its own feet. Hazel gasped, eyes wide. "Is he mine?" Lena looked to Ben, who was already walking toward them, a mixture of disbelief and amusement on his face. "Only if it's okay with your dad." Ben crossed his arms, one brow raised. "A puppy?" Lena gave him a small shrug. "I figured if I'm going to win her heart, I might as well go big." He looked down at Hazel, who was already wrapped around the wiggling furball like she'd known it her whole life. And Ben, who wasn't ready to say yes to everything, found himself nodding anyway. "Looks like we've got a new roommate." The sun had dipped, low, casting the backyard in soft amber light. Paper plates littered the picnic table, a few deflated balloons clung to the fence, and the last of the guests had driven off with tired smiles and icing-smeared party favors. Hazel was curled up inside on the couch, fast asleep with the new puppy whom she'd promptly named Waffle Stucked against her chest. Ben stepped out onto the back porch with 2 mugs of lukewarm coffee and handed one to Lena, who sat on the top step with her shoes kicked off and her legs stretched out toward the yard. "You survived," she said, taking the cup. "Barely," he replied. 7-year-olds are ruthless. She laughed softly, her head tilting back just enough to catch the fading light. It framed her face in gold, and for a moment, Ben forgot how to breathe. They sipped in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't press or linger, just settled. "She was really happy today," Lena said eventually, her voice quieter now. "I haven't seen joy like that in a long time." "Yeah," Ben said. "She's got a lot of love in her. Always has." They both looked out at the yard, at the last flickers of light stretching across the grass, and Ben let the quiet stretch just a little longer. "I meant what I said the other night," Lena murmured. "I don't want to run anymore. I'm tired of disappearing." Ben set his mug down on the step beside him. "Then don't." She turned to face him, her eyes steady and open, no defenses, no polished smile, just Lena. "I don't know how to do this perfectly," she said, "but I know I want to try." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His hand lingered there, just for a heartbeat, before he leaned in. The kiss was slow, unrushed, honest. It wasn't fireworks. It was quieter than that, like breathing. Like the beginning of something they'd both been walking toward for a long time without even knowing it. When they pulled apart, Lena rested her forehead against his. "So, that just happened," she whispered. "Yeah," Ben said, smiling. Finally, the park looked just the same. The benches were still weather-worn, the paint peeling at the edges, the swing chains still creaking with every rise and fall. Kids raced down the slides and across the field, their laughter bouncing off the trees. Spring had brought the town back to life, the air warm and filled with the scent of cut grass and blooming things. Ben sat on the same bench where he'd first offered a half sandwich to a stranger with red-rimmed eyes. But now she wasn't a stranger. Lena sat beside him, one leg crossed over the other, her hand resting gently over his. Waffles, now slightly larger and twice as mischievous, sat between their feet, panting happily after chasing Hazel across the field. Hazel twirled under the open sky, her new dress flaring like a flower in bloom, her laughter as unburdened as ever. "I can't believe this is where it started," Lena said softly, glancing at the old wood beneath her fingers. Ben nodded. "You look like you hadn't eaten in a week." She laughed, a sound that had grown easier over the weeks. "And you look like someone who didn't ask too many questions." "I wasn't ready for answers back then," he said. "Maybe neither of us were." Lena leaned her head against his shoulder. "But we're here now. They watched Hazel play, the puppy tumbling after her in a blur of golden fur and floppy ears. The sun stretched long shadows across the grass, the day softening into evening. Ben turned to her, brushing his thumb lightly over her knuckles. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" She shook her head. "Walking away from that life was the hardest thing I ever did, but finding this one, that's what made it worth it." They sat in that shared quiet, where everything unspoken was understood. It wasn't about headlines or money or hiding anymore. It was about pancakes in the morning, walks in the evening, and letting someone see you not the version the world expected, but the one that existed when everything else fell away. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, Ben kissed her temple and whispered, "Welcome home." Because this time, they weren't strangers. They were exactly where they were meant to be.